The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth as Sarah Mitchell pulled her truck onto the shoulder of Highway 87. Something had caught her eye, a flash of movement near the abandoned rest stop that had been closed since 2010. Most people drove past this stretch of desert without a second glance, but Sarah wasn't most people. As a wildlife rehabilitation specialist, she'd learned to notice the things others missed. She stepped out of her vehicle, squinting against the glare. The heat rose in visible wave from the asphalt, distorting everything beyond 50 feet. The old rest stop looked like a relic from another era, its windows boarded up, graffiti covering every surface. But there it was again, that movement, coming from behind a collapsed chain-link fence. Sarah's heart began to race as she moved closer. Years of experience had taught her to recognize distress in animals, and every instinct she possessed was screaming that something was terribly wrong here. She pulled out her phone, checking for signal. 1 bar, better than nothing. As she rounded the corner of the building, she froze. There, in a makeshift enclosure constructed from rusted metal panels and rotting wood, was a chimpanzee. But this wasn't just any chimpanzee. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the animal was in critical condition. His fur was matted and thin in patches, his frame skeletal. He sat hunched in the corner, rocking slowly back and forth in a motion that spoke of years of psychological trauma. Sarah's professional composure nearly cracked. In 15 years of wildlife work, she'd seen abuse and neglect, but something about this scene shook her to her core. The enclosure was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with no shade structure, no enrichment, nothing but an overturned metal bowl and a tire that had been there so long it had fused to the ground with rust and date. She approached slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. The chimpanzee's head lifted slightly, and Sarah saw his eyes, clouded with cataract but still aware, still intelligent, still somehow holding on to life. Around his neck was a collar, weathered and cracked but still visible. She could just make out lettering on it. Pulling out her phone, Sarah zoomed in with her camera. Her hands trembled as she read the name on the collar, Michael Jackson. Below it, a date, 2010. 15 years. This animal had been trapped here for 15 years. The implications hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a recent case of abandonment. Someone had kept this chimpanzee here, in these conditions, for a decade and a half. Questions flooded her mind. Where had he come from? Who had done this? How had he survived? Sarah immediately dialed her office. Katie, I need emergency backup at mile marker 247 on Highway 87. I've got a critical situation. A chimpanzee, maybe 40 years old, severe neglect. I need the rescue team, veterinary support, and call Sheriff Morrison. This is a criminal case. As she waited, Sarah couldn't take her eyes off Michael Jackson. He'd stopped rocking and was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something almost human in his gaze, a plea, a question, maybe even hope. She'd worked with primates before, knew their cognitive abilities, their emotional depth. This animal understood he was trapped. He'd understood it for 15 years. She began documenting everything with her camera, the enclosure, the conditions, the lack of food or clean water. In the corner, she spotted something that made her stomach turn. Scratch marks on the metal panels, some old and rusted over, others more recent. Michael Jackson had been trying to escape. For 15 years, he'd been trying to escape. Sarah moved to the gate of the enclosure. It was secured with a heavy padlock, also rusted but still functional. She tested it, knowing she couldn't break it without tools. I'm going to get you out, she said softly, meeting the chimpanzee's eyes. I promise you, Michael, I'm going to get you out of here. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the desert silence. Sarah's rescue team was arriving, along with Sheriff Morrison's patrol car. As they piled out and saw the scene, she watched their faces transform from professional curiosity to horror. Dear God, whispered Tom, her senior technician. How long has he been here? 15 years, Sarah replied, her voice tight with controlled rage. According to his collar, 15 years. Sheriff Morrison was already on his radio, calling for bolt cutters and additional units. We need to process this as a crime scene, he said grimly. This is animal cruelty on a scale I've never seen. We'll get him out, but we have to document everything first. Sarah knelt near the enclosure again. Michael Jackson had moved closer to the fence, his fingers, so heartbreakingly human-like, wrapped around the chain links. She reached out slowly, and after a moment's hesitation, he touched her hand. His skin was rough, calloused, but warm. Alive. "We're getting you out, Michael," she said again. "Today. Right now. I swear to you, your night may end today." As the team began setting up equipment and the veterinarian arrived with emergency medical supplies, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Getting Michael Jackson out of this hell was just the first step. The real question was whether, after 15 years of unimaginable suffering, he could ever truly be free again. Dr. Ramon Delgado knelt beside the enclosure, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of Michael Jackson's condition. As the lead veterinarian for exotic animal emergencies in the Southwest, he'd seen countless cases of neglect, but this chimpanzee survival seemed almost impossible. He pulled out his medical kit, hands steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We need to sedate him before we move him," Dr. Delgado said, loading a dart gun with practiced efficiency. "His stress levels are through the roof, and given his condition, any struggle could be fatal. Sarah, keep talking to him. Your voice seems to calm him." Sarah continued her soft monologue, telling Michael Jackson about the sanctuary where he'd be taken, about the trees and grass and other chimpanzees he'd meet. She had no idea if any of it was possible, if he'd even survive the next hour, but she needed him to know that someone cared, that help had finally arrived. The tranquilizer dart hit Michael Jackson's shoulder with a soft thud. He barely flinched, his eyes finding Sarah's as the medication began to work. She watched as his grip on the fence slowly relaxed, his body sagging against the metal panels. "It's okay," she whispered. "We've got you now." Sheriff Morrison's deputy arrived with industrial bolt cutters. The sound of metal snapping echoed across the desert as the padlock gave way. Tom and another technician carefully opened the gate, moving slowly despite the urgency everyone felt. Dr. Delgado entered first, his hands gentle as he examined the unconscious chimpanzee. "His vitals are weak but stable," the veterinarian announced, his stethoscope pressed against Michael Jackson's chest. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration, probable kidney damage. These lesions on his skin suggest untreated infections. His teeth are damaged. Looks like he's been chewing on metal, probably trying to escape. I'm amazed he's alive." They lifted Michael Jackson onto a stretcher designed for large primates. He weighed barely 90 pounds, at least 50 pounds underweight for an adult male chimpanzee. His body felt fragile in their hands, every rib visible through his sparse fur. Sarah blinked back tears as they carried him to the specialized transport vehicle her team had brought. Inside the climate-controlled unit, Dr. Delgado immediately began emergency treatment. An forline went into Michael Jackson's arm, fluids and nutrients flowing into his depleted system. "His core temperature is dangerously high," the doctor said, adjusting cooling packs around the chimpanzee's body. "Another few hours in that sun might have killed him." While the medical team worked, Sheriff Morrison began his investigation of the site. His deputies photographed everything, collected evidence, and searched for any clues about who had imprisoned Michael Jackson here. In a dilapidated shed behind the enclosure, they found something that made Sarah's blood run cold. "You need to see this," Morrison called out. Inside the shed, illuminated by the deputies' flashlights, was a makeshift living space. A dirty mattress on the floor, empty beer cans scattered everywhere, and dozens of photographs pinned to the walls. Many showed Michael Jackson as a younger chimpanzee, dressed in human clothes, performing in what looked like roadside attractions. There were old newspaper clippings, too, advertising amazing chimp shows at various locations across the Southwest. But it was a journal that told the real story. Sarah picked it up carefully, her hand shaking as she read the scrawled entries. The owner's name was Gerald Hawkins, a former circus performer who'd acquired Michael Jackson as an infant in 1995. For years, Hawkins had used a chimpanzee in traveling shows, making money from tourists who paid to take photos and watch tricks. Then, in 2010, everything had changed. Hawkins had been injured in a car accident, leaving him unable to continue touring. But rather than surrendering Michael Jackson to a proper facility, he'd brought him to this abandoned rest stop, a property Hawkins's family had owned for decades. The journal entries became increasingly erratic after that. showing a man descending into alcoholism and mental illness, but never once considering the suffering of the animal he'd imprisoned. The final entry was dated 3 months ago. Can't keep coming out here. Getting too old. Michael will be fine. Animals are tough. He just left him, Sarah said, her voice breaking. He abandoned him completely 3 months ago. Michael Jackson has been here alone, with no food, no water except what little rain might have collected, no human contact, just waiting to die. Sheriff Morrison's jaw tightened. We'll find Hawkins. This is criminal neglect resulting in animal torture. He'll face serious charges. Back at the transport vehicle, Dr. Delgado had stabilized Michael Jackson enough for travel. We need to get him to the sanctuary immediately, he said. He needs round-the-clock medical care, a sterile environment, and extensive rehabilitation. Even then, I can't promise anything. The damage is extensive. Sarah climbed into the vehicle, refusing to leave Michael Jackson's side. As they pulled away from that terrible place, she looked back at the enclosure. 15 years. She tried to imagine what that meant. 5,475 days of isolation, heat, hunger, and despair. How had he survived? What kind of will to live did that require? The drive to Desert Haven Primate Sanctuary took 3 hours. Sarah watched Dr. Delgado monitor Michael Jackson's vital signs constantly, adjusting medications, checking before. The chimpanzee remained unconscious, his breathing shallow but regular. She found herself studying his face, seeing past the damage to the individual beneath. His fingers twitched occasionally, and she wondered what he was dreaming about. Freedom? Other chimpanzees? The life he'd had before Gerald Hawkins trapped him in that desert prison? When they finally arrived at Desert Haven, Dr. Patricia Chen, the sanctuary's director, was waiting with her entire medical staff. They prepared an intensive care unit specifically for Michael Jackson, having been briefed on his condition during the drive. The room was pristine, climate-controlled, and equipped with everything needed to save his life, if his life could be saved. They transferred him carefully to a specialized recovery bed. Dr. Chen began her own examination, her experienced hands checking his joints, his eyes, his skin. Severe arthritis in his hips and shoulders, she noted. Cataracts in both eyes, probably from UV exposure. Malnutrition has affected every system. We're looking at months of recovery, maybe years, and that's if he pulls through the next 7 to 2 hours. Sarah stayed as a medical team worked through the night. They cleaned Michael Jackson's wounds, treated his infections, continued fluids and nutrients. Around midnight, something remarkable happened. His eyes opened. Disoriented and frightened, he tried to sit up, his hands reaching out instinctively. "It's okay, Michael," Sarah said softly, moving into his line of vision. "You're safe now. You're at a sanctuary. No more cages. No more desert. You're safe." His clouded eyes found her face, and something changed in his expression. Recognition. Maybe, or perhaps just the recognition of kindness. His hand extended toward her, trembling. She took it gently, feeling his grip, weak but deliberate. "Welcome home, Michael," she whispered. "Welcome home." Morning light filtered through the windows of Michael Jackson's recovery room, the first gentle dawn he'd experienced in 15 years. Sarah had dozed in a chair beside his bed, refusing to leave despite the staff's insistence that she rest. She woke to find him watching her, his eyes more alert than they'd been the night before. Dr. Chen entered quietly, carrying a tray with soft fruits and special primate formula. "Let's see if he'll eat," she said, her voice carefully neutral. After years of running the sanctuary, she'd learned not to make promises, especially in cases as severe. Michael Jackson's gaze shifted to the food. His nostrils flayed, catching the scent of bananas and apples. For a long moment, he didn't move, as if afraid this was some kind of trick, that the food would be taken away. Sarah's heart ached watching him struggle with this simple decision. "It's yours, Michael," Dr. Chen said gently, placing the tray within his reach. "All yours. No one will take it. You can eat as much as you want, whenever you want." Slowly, almost painfully, Michael Jackson reached for a piece of banana. His hand shook as he brought it to his mouth. He took a small bite, then another. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she watched him eat. Such a simple act, Yet it represented everything: hope, survival, the possibility of healing. Over the next few days, Michael Jackson's physical condition began to stabilize. The four fluids rehydrated his depleted system. Antibiotics fought the infections ravaging his body. Dr. Chen's team worked around the clock, monitoring every vital sign, adjusting treatments, celebrating each small victory. But everyone knew the physical recovery was just the beginning. The psychological damage is what worries me most, Dr. Chen told Sarah during a morning briefing. 15 years of isolation and deprivation in a critical period of his life. Chimpanzees are incredibly social creatures. Being alone that long, with no enrichment, no interaction, it creates trauma we can barely comprehend. We need to bring in Dr. Marcus Reeves. Dr. Reeves was a renowned primatologist specializing in trauma recovery. He'd worked with former laboratory chimps, rescued entertainment animals, and victims of the illegal pet trade. If anyone could help Michael Jackson, it was him. He arrived at Desert Haven 3 days after the rescue, carrying decades of experience and a reputation for miracles. His first session with Michael Jackson was observational. He sat outside the recovery room for hours, simply watching. He noted the rocking behavior that returned whenever Michael Jackson was left alone. The way he startled at sudden sounds. How he avoided eye contact, except with Sarah, who visited daily. The protective way he curled around his food, even though no one had tried to take it. Classic symptoms of severe psychological trauma, Dr. Reeves told the assembled team that evening. What we're seeing is similar to PTSD in humans. His learned helplessness, anxiety, probably depression. The rocking is self-soothing behavior that became ingrained during his captivity. The food guarding makes sense. He was starving for months. These behaviors won't disappear overnight. He paused, looking around the room at the dedicated staff members. But here's what gives me hope. His engaging with Sarah. That means his capacity for trust isn't completely destroyed. His eating, his accepting care. These are signs that he wants to live, that some part of him believes life can be better. That's what we build on. The rehabilitation plan Dr. Reeves designed was comprehensive and patient. First, they needed to establish Michael Jackson's recovery room as a completely safe space. No sudden changes, consistent caregivers, predictable routines. They introduced enrichment items slowly, a soft blanket, which he immediately clutched and refused to release. A stuffed toy, which he examined cautiously before pressing it to his chest. Simple things, but each represented a step toward healing. Sarah became Michael Jackson's primary companion during this phase. She'd arrive each morning, spending hours in his room, talking to him, reading to him, simply being present. She brought pictures of the larger enclosures at Desert Haven, showing him the outdoor spaces where other rescued chimpanzees lived, playing and socializing in environments designed to mimic their natural habitats. "This will be yours someday," she told him, pointing to photographs of trees and climbing structures and pools of water. "When you're ready, you'll go outside. You'll feel grass under your feet. You'll climb trees. You'll meet other chimpanzees who've been through hard times too. They'll understand you, Michael. You won't be alone anymore." 2 weeks after the rescue, Dr. Chen decided Michael Jackson was strong enough to move to a larger recovery suite. This room had windows overlooking the sanctuary's gardens, more space to move, and crucially, a window that looked into an adjacent enclosure where 2 elderly female chimpanzees lived. The day of the move, the team was nervous. Changes could be triggering for trauma survivors. But Michael Jackson surprised them. As they wheeled his bed into the new room, his eyes widened, taking in the space, the natural light, the view. When he saw the windows, he made a sound, not quite a vocalization, more like a sharp exhale of breath. "What do you see, Michael?" Sarah asked, helping him sit up so he could look out properly. Through the window, the 2 female chimpanzees, Rosie and Luna, were visible in their enclosure. They were eating breakfast, grooming each other, moving with the ease of individuals who'd reclaimed their lives after their own rescue stories. Michael Jackson watched them intently, his body completely still except for his eyes, which tracked their every movement. Then something extraordinary happened. Rosie looked up and saw Michael Jackson at the window. She approached slowly, stopping a few feet from the glass. For a long moment, the 2 chimpanzees simply looked at each other. Then Rosie pressed her hand against the window. Michael Jackson stared at her hand. Minutes passed. Sarah held her breath, not daring to move. Finally, shakily, Michael Jackson raised his own hand and placed it against the glass, matching Rosie's gesture. The two chimpanzees stood like that, separated by glass but connected by something deeper: recognition, empathy, understanding. He remembers Dr. Reeves said quietly from the doorway. After 15 years of isolation, he remembers what it means to connect with another of his kind. That night, Michael Jackson didn't rock himself to sleep. Instead, he positioned his bed where he could see the window, where he could watch the stars, another thing he hadn't seen clearly in 15 years, and know that on the other side of that glass, he wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Sheriff Morrison called with news. Gerald Hawkins had been located in a nursing home in Nevada, suffering from advanced cirrhosis and dementia. He'd shown no remorse when confronted with a photograph of Michael Jackson's condition, insisting he'd taken care of that chimp just fine. The district attorney was moving forward with animal cruelty charges, though given Hawkins's health, he'd likely never see trial. Sarah felt a complicated mixture of anger and pity when she heard the news. Part of her wanted Hawkins to face full justice for what he'd done. But another part recognized that the best revenge, the best outcome, was simply for Michael Jackson to heal, to reclaim his life. That would be the ultimate proof that Hawkins's cruelty hadn't won. Focus on Michael, Dr. Chen advised. Hawkins is the past. We're building Michael's future now. And that future was beginning to take shape. Each day brought small improvements. Michael Jackson started exploring his new room, touching the walls, investigating the enrichment items the staff carefully introduced. He began eating more confidently, even developing preferences. He loved sweet potatoes but wasn't fond of leafy greens. He watched Rosie and Luna constantly, learning from them how chimpanzees behave when they were safe, when they were happy. 3 weeks after the rescue, Dr. Reeves decided it was time for the next crucial step. We need to see if he can handle more direct social contact, he explained. Physical presence, not just visual. Rosie has shown interest in him, and she's perfect for this. Gentle, patient, experienced with traumatized individuals. But it has to be Michael Jackson's choice. He has to want this. The plan was simple but nerve-wracking. They would open a small viewing door between Michael Jackson's suite and Rosie's enclosure, allowing the two chimpanzees to see, smell, and potentially touch each other more directly. If Michael Jackson showed signs of distress, they closed it immediately. His psychological safety was paramount. Sarah was present for the moment. Of course, she'd become such a constant in Michael Jackson's recovery that he looked for her whenever she wasn't visible, his anxiety spiking until she returned. Now, as the star prepared to open the viewing door, he reached for her hand. "It's okay," she assured him. "This is Rosie. She's kind. She wants to be your friend. But only if you want to meet her. It's always your choice, Michael. Always." The door slid open with a soft mechanical hum. Michael Jackson tensed, his grip on Sarah's hand tightening. Through the opening, Rosie appeared, moving slowly, non-threateningly. She made soft vocalizations, friendly sounds that chimps use to communicate peaceful intentions. Michael Jackson stared at her. His breathing quickened. For a moment, everyone thought he might panic, might retreat to his old defensive rocking. But then, slowly, he released Sarah's hand and moved closer to the opening. Rosie sat down, making herself smaller, less intimidating. She extended her hand through the bars, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. Michael Jackson reached out. His fingers trembled as they touched Rosie's palm. The female chimp remained perfectly still, letting him set the pace. Then, in a gesture that made everyone present catch their breath, Michael Jackson wrapped his fingers around Rosie's hand and held on. Two rescued souls, two survivors of human cruelty, connecting across the space that had separated them. It lasted only a moment before Michael Jackson retreated, overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. But he didn't show fear. Instead, he looked back at Rosie with something that might have been wonder. That, Dr. Reeves said, his voice thick with emotion, is how healing begins. The morning light painted golden streaks across the sanctuary as Sarah arrived for her daily visit. 6 weeks had passed since Michael Jackson's rescue, and each day revealed new facets of his personality emerging from beneath the layers of trauma. Today felt different somehow. The air carried a quality of anticipation that made her quicken her step toward his recovery suite. Dr. Reeves was already there, reviewing overnight observation notes. "He barely slept," the primatologist said, though his tone wasn't concerned. He spent most of the night at the viewing window, watching Rosie and Luna. Not distressed, engaged. "I think he's ready for the next step." Sarah looked through the observation window. Michael Jackson sat cross-legged near the viewing door, which had been left open overnight. His posture was alert, his eyes bright despite the sleepless night. When he noticed Sarah, he made a sound, a soft pant-hoot that made her heart leap. It was the first vocalization he'd made that wasn't stress-related. "Did you hear that?" she asked, barely breathing. Dr. Reeves smiled. "I heard it. That's a greeting call. He's not just seeing you as a source of comfort anymore. He's initiating social interaction. This is huge, Sarah. This is consciousness returning, personality emerging. The Michael Jackson who existed before 15 years of hell is still in there and is fighting to come back." The plan for today was ambitious. They would allow direct contact between Michael Jackson and Rosie through a specially designed transition area, a neutral space where both chimpanzees could retreat to their respective enclosures if needed. Dr. Chen's entire team was on standby, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. But everyone hoped, desperately, that Michael Jackson was ready for this leap. The preparation took hours. The transition area needed to be perfect, clean, enriched with items familiar to both chimps, structured to minimize stress. Dr. Reeves positioned himself where he could observe every detail of body language from both animals. Sarah stood nearby, her presence a security blanket for Michael Jackson. "We let Rosie in first," Dr. Reeves explained. "She's comfortable with the space. Then we open Michael's door and let him decide whether to enter. No pressure, no forcing. This has to be his choice." Rosie entered the transition area with confident ease, immediately investigating the new enrichment items. A pile of fresh browse, some puzzle feeders filled with treats, scattered pieces of fruit. She settled into a comfortable spot, deliberately positioning herself to appear non-threatening. Then came the moment of truth. A staff member opened the door to Michael Jackson's suite. He appeared in the doorway, his body tense, every muscle coiled. His eyes found Rosie immediately. She looked at him calmly, then deliberately looked away. Chimp language for "I'm not a threat." Michael Jackson took one step forward, then another. Sarah watched, barely breathing, as he entered the transition area for the first time. He moved slowly, hugging the walls, putting distance between himself and Rosie. But he was choosing to be there. That was what mattered. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Both chimpanzees occupied the space, aware of each other but not interacting. Rosie continued to eat, occasionally glancing at Michael Jackson with what could only be described as patience. Michael Jackson gradually relaxed, his posture softening. He noticed a piece of mango near his feet. After a hesitation, he picked it up and ate it. Then Rosie did something brilliant. She selected a particularly nice piece of fruit and placed it on the ground between them, before retreating a few feet. It was an offering, a gesture of friendship in the universal language of primates. She was sharing resources, showing him he was safe, that there was enough, that he didn't have to fight or fear. Michael Jackson stared at the fruit. Minutes passed. The tension in the observation room was unbearable. Sarah found herself silently pleading with him to take this step, to accept this olive branch. He moved forward cautiously. When he reached the fruit, he paused, looking at Rosie. She remained still, non-threatening. Michael Jackson picked up the fruit, and then, in a moment that would be recorded as a breakthrough in his recovery notes, he moved closer to Rosie and sat down near her. Not touching, not yet, but near, sharing space, accepting companionship. Rosie made a soft grooming gesture in the air, not touching Michael Jackson but showing intention. He watched this with intense focus. Then, shakily, he reached out and touched her arm. Just a brief contact, but Rosie responded immediately with gentle grooming motions, her fingers carefully parting his thin fur. The grooming session lasted only a minute before Michael Jackson became overwhelmed and retreated to his doorway. But he didn't leave. He stayed in the transition area, watching Rosie, processing this profound experience of positive social contact after a decade and a half of isolation. Over the following weeks, these sessions became daily occurrences. Each one lasted a bit longer. Michael Jackson's confidence grew incrementally. Rosie proved to be an extraordinarily patient teacher, showing him through a calm presence that the world could be safe, that other beings could be trusted, that connection didn't mean pain. The Sanctuary staff documented every interaction, building a comprehensive picture of Michael Jackson's recovery. They noted how he began to mimic Rosie's behaviors, her relaxed postures, her feeding patterns, even her vocalizations. He was relearning how to be a chimpanzee, skills that should have been taught by his mothering community but were stolen when he was captured as an infant. Dr. Chen introduced Luna to the mix next, expanding Michael Jackson's social circle carefully. Luna was older, quieter than Rosie, with her own history of trauma. She'd been rescued from a roadside zoo where she'd lived alone for 30 years. If anyone could understand Michael Jackson's experience, it was her. The first meeting between Michael Jackson and Luna was different from his introduction to Rosie. There was immediate recognition in Luna's eyes when she saw him, the recognition of shared suffering. She approached him directly, without fear or hesitation, and simply sat beside him. No overtures, no demand for interaction, just presence. Michael Jackson relaxed in a way he never had with Rosie. Perhaps it was Luna's age, her maternal energy, or simply the depth of understanding that passed between two souls who'd endured similar hells. Whatever the reason, within minutes, he was leaning against her, accepting comfort in a way that brought tears to every observer's eyes. His remembering what family feels like, Dr. Reeves said quietly, or maybe learning it for the first time. Either way, this is the deepest healing we've seen yet. That night, Michael Jackson slept in the transition area for the first time, with Rosie on one side of him and Luna on the other. The three rescued chimpanzees formed a small troop, each healing from their own traumas, supporting each other through the long process of recovery. Sarah stayed late, watching them through the observation window. Dr. Chen found her there near midnight. "You should go home," the director said gently. "Get some rest." "I keep thinking about those 15 years. Sarah replied, her eyes on the sleeping chimps. "Every single day he was alone in that desert, I was living my life. I was happy sometimes, sad sometimes, busy with work and friends and normal human things. And all that time, he was out there, suffering. How do I reconcile that? How does the world work this way?" Dr. Chen put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You can't carry guilt for not knowing. None of us knew. But you found him. Sarah, when it mattered most, when he'd been abandoned completely and left to die, you saw him. You stopped. You didn't drive past like everyone else had been doing. You saved his life." "He saved mine too," Sarah said softly. "I just didn't know I needed saving." The next morning brought unexpected news. Sheriff Morrison called to report that Gerald Hawkins had died in the nursing home. The criminal case against him will be closed without prosecution. Justice, in the legal sense, would never be served. Sarah felt numb hearing the news. She went to tell Michael Jackson, needing to see him, though she wasn't sure why. When she entered his suite, he was awake, sitting with Rosie and Luna, eating breakfast. He looked up when she approached, and for the first time since his rescue, he reached for her without prompting, without distress. He simply wanted to hold her hand. "The man who hurt you is gone," Sarah told him, knowing he couldn't understand the words but hoping he might sense their meaning. "He can't hurt you anymore. You're free, Michael. Truly free." Michael Jackson squeezed her hand gently, then turned back to his breakfast, sharing pieces of fruit with Rosie and Luna. It was such a normal moment, such an everyday scene of primate social life. And that, Sarah realized, was the real victory. Not justice or vengeance or punishment for Gerald Hawkins, but this Michael Jackson living a normal life, experiencing normal pleasures, building normal relationships. Dr. Reeves began preparing for the next phase of rehabilitation, introducing Michael Jackson to the sanctuary's larger outdoor enclosures. "He's ready," the primatologist declared. "Physically, he's gained weight, his infections are healed, his mobility is improving. Psychologically, he's formed stable bonds with Rosie and Luna. It's time to show him what real freedom looks like." The outdoor enclosure was a masterpiece of sanctuary design, 3 acres of carefully maintained habitat with trees, grass, climbing structures, pools, and caves. It currently houses a troop of 6 rescued chimpanzees, all with their own trauma histories, all successfully rehabilitated. Introducing Michael Jackson to this group would be the ultimate test of his recovery, but first, he needed to remember what outdoors felt like. The plan was to give him access to a smaller, private outdoor area first, with just Rosie and Luna. Let him feel grass under his feet, wind on his face, sun that warmed instead of tortured. Let him climb, explore, experience the world as it was meant to be experienced. The day chosen for Michael Jackson's first venture outside was perfect. Mild temperature, partly cloudy, gentle breeze. Sarah arrived early, her stomach knotted with anxiety and hope. She'd brought her camera, wanting to document this moment, this rebirth. Dr. Chen had arranged everything beautifully. The private outdoor area was filled with enrichment. Ropes to climb, platforms to explore, fresh vegetation to investigate. A small pool sparkled in the sunlight, surrounded by smooth rocks and shade structures. It looked like paradise, and in a way, it was. Michael Jackson stood at the doorway leading outside, Rosie and Luna flanking him like supportive sisters. He could see the outdoor space, smell the fresh air, feel the breeze. But that threshold represented everything. The end of captivity, the beginning of true freedom, the terrifying leap into an unknown world. Take your time, Sarah encouraged from nearby. There's no rush. This is all yours, whenever you're ready. Michael Jackson looked at her, then at Rosie, then back at the outdoor space. His hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles white with tension. Everyone watching held their breath, willing him forward but unable to help, understanding that this step he had to take alone. Then Rosie did something perfect. She walked outside, into the grass, and looked back at Michael Jackson. "Come on," her posture said. "I'll show you. It's safe." And Michael Jackson, drawing on reserves of courage built through weeks of healing, followed her. His first step onto grass in 15 years made him freeze. He looked down at his feet, confused by the texture, the sensation. Then he took another step, and another. Rosie led him further into the space, Luna following behind. Within minutes, Michael Jackson was exploring, touching everything, his eyes wide with wonder. When he reached the pool, he stared at the water for a long moment before tentatively dipping his hand in. The coolness made him jerk back, then try again, then splash experimentally. Sarah watched through tears as Michael Jackson discovered joy. Real, pure joy. He climbed onto a low platform, sat in the sun, and simply tilted his face upward, eyes closed, absorbing warmth that didn't burn. He picked grass and examined it closely, brought it to his nose, tasted it. Every sensation was new again, reborn through the lens of freedom. Rosie and Luna gave him space to explore but remained nearby, their presence a constant reassurance. When Michael Jackson became overwhelmed and retreated to a shaded corner, they came to sit with him, grooming him gently until his breathing steadied and he was ready to explore more. That first outdoor session lasted 3 hours. By the end, Michael Jackson was exhausted but transformed. Something fundamental had shifted in him. He'd crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. He'd tasted freedom, and it was everything worth living for. The October sun rose over Desert Haven Sanctuary, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. 4 months had passed since Michael Jackson's rescue from that desert prison, and today marked the most significant milestone in his recovery journey. Today, he would meet the main troop and potentially join the larger outdoor enclosure permanently. Sarah arrived at dawn, as she had every day since the rescue. But this morning felt different. She found Dr. Reeves and Dr. Chen already at the observation post, reviewing final preparations. The main troop, 6 chimpanzees ranging from adolescent to elderly, had been carefully prepared for this introduction. They'd seen Michael Jackson from a distance, caught his scent, heard his vocalizations. Now they would meet face to face. "How's he doing?" Sarah asked, though she could see Michael Jackson through the window, sitting calmly with Rosie and Luna, grooming each other in the early morning light. "He's ready," Dr. Reeves said with confidence. "Look at him, Sarah. Really look. That's not the same chimpanzee we pulled out of that hellhole. He's gained 30 pounds. His fur has grown back thick and healthy. His eyes are clear. But more than that, his spirit has returned. He initiates play with Rosie. He comforts Luna when she has nightmares. He has become a fully functioning member of their little group. The question now is whether the main troop will accept him. The introduction protocol was meticulous. First, the main troop will be given access to an adjacent area where they could see and smell Michael Jackson's group through mesh barriers. They'd spend hours assessing each other, reading body language, establishing initial impressions. Only if both groups showed positive interest would the barriers be removed. Michael Jackson seemed to understand something significant was happening. As the main troop filed into the adjacent area, his posture became alert, attentive. The largest male, a rescued circus chimp named Marcus, approached the barrier first. He was a troop leader, and his acceptance was crucial. Marcus studied Michael Jackson with intense focus. Years of abuse in the circus had made Marcus cautious but not aggressive. He'd built this troop at Desert Haven, welcoming each new rescue, creating a safe community. Now he was evaluating whether Michael Jackson could join that community. Michael Jackson met Marcus's gaze, then deliberately looked away and down, a submissive gesture, acknowledging Marcus's dominance. It was exactly the right move. Marcus's posture relaxed slightly. He made a soft pantoot, not aggressive, more like a question. Rosie responded to Marcus's call with her own vocalization, essentially vouching for Michael Jackson. The interaction between the two groups became more animated. Younger members of the main troop approached the barrier, curious about the newcomers. An adolescent female named Hope pressed her face close to the mesh, staring at Michael Jackson with undisguised interest. Hope was rescued from a laboratory 2 years ago. Dr. Chen explained quietly to Sarah. She's been looking for a special companion in the troop, but hasn't bonded strongly with anyone yet. Look at how she's reacting to Michael. Indeed, Hope seemed fascinated by Michael Jackson. She made soft vocalizations, reached her hand through the mesh toward him. After a hesitation, Michael Jackson moved closer and touched her fingertips through the barrier. The connection was electric, immediate, two souls recognizing something kindred in each other. For 3 hours, the two groups interacted through the barrier. The staff watched for any signs of aggression or rejection. Instead, they saw curiosity, acceptance, and in the case of Hope and Michael Jackson, something that looked remarkably like attraction. By midday, Dr. Reeves made the decision. Open the barriers. Let's bring them together. The moment was terrifying and beautiful. As the mesh panel slowly retracted, both groups tensed, ready to flee if needed. Marcus stepped through first, his massive frame commanding respect. He approached Michael Jackson directly, and for a heart-stopping moment, no one knew what would happen. Then Marcus reached out and touched Michael Jackson's shoulder, a gesture of acceptance. He vocalized softly, a welcoming sound, and turned to lead away into the main enclosure. It was an invitation to join the troop, to become part of the family. Michael Jackson looked back at Sarah, standing at the observation window. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. She'd been his lifeline, his connection to trust and safety during the darkest phase of his recovery. But this was the moment he no longer needed her in that way. He was stepping into his true life, with his own kind, in his own world. Sarah pressed her hand against the glass. Michael Jackson touched the glass from his side, one last connection. Then he turned and followed Marcus into the main enclosure, Rosie and Luna flanking him, Hope bouncing excitedly at his side. The first day with the main troop was a revelation. Michael Jackson explored a 3-acre enclosure with growing confidence, climbing trees for the first time in 15 years, splashing in a large pool, investigating every corner of his new territory. The troop accepted him with remarkable ease, each member taking turns introducing themselves, establishing relationships. But it was Hope who became his constant companion. The two rescued souls gravitated toward each other naturally, grooming each other for hours, sharing food, exploring together. By evening, they'd built a nest in one of the elevated sleeping platforms, choosing to sleep side by side. It was the ultimate sign of trust, of bonding, of healing finding healing. Dr. Reeves documented everything with professional precision, but his eyes were misty. In 30 years of primate rehabilitation, I've never seen a recovery quite like this, he admitted. The depth of trauma Michael Jackson survived, the completeness of his healing, it's extraordinary. He should have been broken beyond repair. Instead, he's thriving. As days turned into weeks, Michael Jackson's integration into the troupe became complete. He established his place in the social hierarchy, not dominant, but respected. He developed relationships with each troupe member, from playful roughhousing with the younger chimps to quiet companionship with elderly Boris, another circus survivor who understood the weight of a painful past. But his bond with Hope deepened into something profound. The two were inseparable, their connection transcending simple companionship. They communicated through subtle gestures and vocalizations that seemed to have private meaning. When Hope had flashbacks to her laboratory trauma, Michael Jackson comforted her with patient grooming and gentle presence. When Michael Jackson occasionally retreated into himself, haunted by memories of isolation, Hope stayed nearby, her presence a reminder that he wasn't alone anymore. Sarah continued to visit regularly, but her role had evolved. She was no longer Michael Jackson's primary attachment figure. Instead, she became a welcome friend, someone he greeted with enthusiasm but didn't depend on for survival. Watching him swing through trees with Hope, playing and calling out with pure joy, Sarah felt a bittersweet satisfaction. She'd helped save his life, but he'd saved himself through sheer will to survive and incredible capacity to heal. 5 months after the rescue, Sheriff Morrison visited the sanctuary with news. The investigation into Gerald Hawkins had uncovered a network of illegal exotic animal trading that spanned decades. Michael Jackson had been purchased as an infant from smugglers who had killed his mother in the African wild. Dozens of other animals had suffered similar fates, though most hadn't survived their captivity. The exposure of this network had led to arrests and the rescue of several other primates still trapped in similar situations. Michael Jackson's story is saving other lives. Morrison told Sarah as they watched the troupe play in the afternoon sun. The media coverage, the public outrage, it's bringing attention to issues people didn't know existed. The DA's office is using his case to push for stronger animal protection laws. Even though Hawkins escaped justice, Michael's suffering won't be meaningless. That evening, Sarah sat at the observation post long after the other visitors had left. Michael Jackson and Hope were building an elaborate nest together, weaving branches and leaves with practiced skill. They worked in perfect synchronization, each anticipating the other's movements. When the nest was complete, they settled in together, Hope's head resting on Michael Jackson's shoulder as the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors. Dr. Chen joined Sarah at the window. "You know what amazes me most," the director said softly. "It's not that he survived 15 years of hell. It's that after everything, he can still love, he can still trust, he can still find joy. That's not just survival, that's transcendence." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past a lump in her throat. She thought about that first day in the desert, the skeletal figure rocking in a cage under merciless sun, seemingly broken beyond redemption. And now this, a healthy, happy chimpanzee living his best life, surrounded by family, loved and loving in return. Winter came to the desert, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain. Michael Jackson discovered he loved the rain, standing in it with his face upturned, letting drops run down his fur. The troupe often found him on rainy days, standing alone in the downpour, completely still, absorbed in the sensation. Hope would eventually come to stand with him, sharing these quiet moments. On the 1-year anniversary of his rescue, the sanctuary held a small celebration. Supporters who donated to Michael Jackson's medical care and rehabilitation were invited to observe the troupe. They watched from the visitor area as the chimpanzees went about their day, playing, eating, grooming, simply being. Sarah gave a short speech about the rescue and recovery, but she kept it brief. This day wasn't about human accomplishments or feel-good stories. It was about Michael Jackson and the life he'd reclaimed against impossible odds. As if on cue, Michael Jackson appeared at the front of the enclosure with Hope. The two chimpanzees approached the viewing area, curious about the gathered humans. Michael Jackson studied the crowd calmly, no fear in his eyes, no trauma response. Just healthy curiosity about the strange bipedal creatures watching him. Someone in the crowd began to clap, and soon everyone joined in, applauding spontaneously. Michael Jackson tilted his head, seeming puzzled by the noise. Then he did something that made everyone laugh. He clapped back, mimicking the gesture, his expression appearing almost amused. "Show off," Sarah said affectionately, knowing he couldn't hear her. "You were always meant to be seen, weren't you?" Not exploited or exhibited, but celebrated. Celebrated for exactly who you are. Hope wrapped her arm around Michael Jackson, and the two retreated into the enclosure, back to their troop, their family, their life. Sarah watched them go, feeling the weight of the past years settle into something like peace. She'd set out that day on Highway 87 for routine work, with no idea she was about to encounter a soul in desperate need of saving. But that's how the most important moments happen, without warning, without preparation, just sudden convergences of circumstance and choice. Dr. Reeves appeared beside her, following her gaze. You know what the most remarkable thing is? His teaching Hope to trust more deeply. She's been here 2 years, but she's never fully relaxed, never stopped being hypervigilant. But with Michael, she's learning to let her guard down. Is giving back exactly what he received, the gift of healing through connection. As the celebration wound down and visitors departed, Sarah took one last look at the enclosure. The troop was settling in for the evening, building nests, grooming each other in the fading light. Michael Jackson and Hope had claimed their favorite sleeping platform, high in an artificial tree structure. They sat together, silhouetted against the sunset, two survivors who'd found each other at exactly the right moment. Sarah thought about all the what-ifs that had brought them to this point. What if she hadn't noticed movement at that abandoned rest stop? What if she'd been running late, driving too fast to stop? What if Michael Jackson had given up just days before, had stopped fighting, had surrendered to the inevitable? What if any one of 1,000 small factors had been different? But they hadn't been different. Against astronomical odds, everything had aligned. She'd stopped, he'd survived. Hope had been waiting. The sanctuary had resources. The team had expertise. One by one, impossible pieces had fallen into place, creating something that shouldn't have been possible, a second chance, a new life, a happy ending that almost didn't happen. "He's going to be okay," Dr. Chen said, her voice full of certainty. "More than okay. He's going to live a full, rich life. He'll have family, companionship, maybe even offspring someday if Hope and he continue bonding. The 15 years he lost don't define him anymore. They are part of his story, but they are not the whole story. This is a whole story, the suffering and the survival, the cruelty and the kindness, the isolation and the connection. All of it together makes him who he is." Sarah nodded, accepting the truth in those words. Michael Jackson's story wasn't a tragedy, even though it contained tragedy. It was a testament to the resilience of life, the power of compassion, and the possibility of transformation. It was proof that no matter how dark the night, dawn could still come. No matter how deep the wound, healing remained possible. No matter how long the captivity, freedom could still be found. As darkness fell over Desert Haven Sanctuary, the chimpanzees settled into sleep. Michael Jackson's soft breathing mingled with Hope's, two heartbeats synchronized, two lives intertwined. Above them, stars emerged in the desert sky, the same stars that had watched over his suffering, now bearing witness to his joy. Sarah drove home that night feeling the profound satisfaction of witnessing something rare and precious, not just a rescue, but a resurrection. Michael Jackson had been given up for dead, abandoned to die alone in the desert, forgotten by the world. But he'd refused to disappear quietly. He'd held on, survived, and when salvation finally came, he'd seize it with both hands. His story would continue, day by day, season by season. There would be challenges ahead, health issues from his years of neglect, occasional psychological setbacks, the normal difficulties of life. But he wouldn't face them alone. He had Hope, Rosie, Luna, Marcus, and the entire troop. He had the dedicated staff of Desert Haven. And somewhere in his memory, Sarah believed, he carried the knowledge that he'd been seen, that someone had stopped, that his suffering had mattered enough to end. That was the real miracle, she thought as she pulled into her driveway. Not that Michael Jackson had survived, though that was remarkable enough, but that after everything he'd endured, he could still open his heart to connection, could still choose trust over fear, could still embrace life with such obvious joy. That was a triumph that Gerald Hawkins could never take away, the victory that made every moment of his suffering count towards something meaningful. Michael Jackson's last stand hadn't been in that desert cage, slowly dying under merciless sun. His last stand was happening now, every day, in every choice to engage with life, to love Hope, to play with the troop, to climb trees and splash in water and build nests under stars. His last stand was his refusal to let cruelty win, his determination to reclaim what had been stolen, his quiet insistence on living fully and freely despite everything that said he shouldn't be able to. And in that stand, he become more than just a rescued chimpanzee. He become a symbol of hope for every creature that had suffered, every soul that had been broken, every life that had been discarded. He proved that the story wasn't over until you stopped writing it, that redemption remained possible even in the darkest circumstances, that love could bloom even in hearts that had known only pain. As Sarah lay in bed that night, she thought about that first moment she'd seen him through the chain-link fence, skeletal, rocking, dying. She thought about his clouded eyes finding haze, the tentative touch of his hand, the collar bearing his name. And she thought about him now, healthy and whole, sleeping peacefully beside hope under the desert stars. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking. Fate, coincidence, the universe, or maybe Michael Jackson himself for being strong enough to survive until help could arrive. Thank you for holding on. Somewhere in the sanctuary, as if he'd heard her across the distance, Michael Jackson stirred in his sleep and pulled Hope closer. In his dreams, perhaps, he was running through African forests he'd never known, reunited with a mother who'd been killed to capture him, finally home after a lifetime of exile. Or perhaps his dreams were simpler, memories of the day's play, anticipation of tomorrow's adventures, the warm comfort of Hope's presence. Either way, he was free. After 15 years of captivity, after being abandoned to die, after suffering that should have destroyed him, Michael Jackson was finally, truly, completely free. And that freedom, earned through unimaginable hardship and granted through unexpected mercy, was the most beautiful ending to the darkest story. Not an ending at all, really, but a beginning. The beginning of the rest of his life, lived on his own terms, surrounded by love, exactly as it always should have been. His last stand had become his first step, and the future stretched before him bright with possibility, unshadowed by the past that had tried so hard to kill him. Michael Jackson had survived. More than that, he transcended, and in doing so, he'd reminded everyone who witnessed his journey that no matter how lost we become, no matter how long we suffer, no matter how completely we're forgotten, redemption remains possible. Hope endures, love persists, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get the chance to start over, to rebuild, to become who we were always meant to be. That was Michael Jackson's gift to the world, not just his survival, but his refusal to let survival be enough. He demanded joy, insisted on connection, chose love over fear even when fear seemed like the only logical response. In that choice, in that brave, determined, beautiful choice, he'd won his last stand and earned his freedom in every sense that mattered. The story that began with abandonment and despair had become a story of rescue and hope. And as the desert night embraced Desert Haven's sanctuary, as the rescued chimpanzees slept peacefully in their safe haven, Michael Jackson's heart beat strong and steady, a rhythm of life that refused to be silenced, a song of survival that would echo long after the last word was spoken. His last stand was over. His new life had begun, and it was glorious.